student, I'm Mr. Leung. So in this video, we are going to talk about the MC questions in chapter 8, and later on we shall have the second video for the long questions. So first of all, we are going to talk about the question 1. So for the question 1 is talking about which of the following tissue types has the greatest number of mitochondria. So you are given 4 different tissue types: the wall of the air sac, the wall of a capillary, the inner wall of a lymph vessel, and the inner wall of the small intestine. So for this question, actually the logic flow is talking about we need to recall the function of the mitochondria first. It's talking about the respiration to break down the food to release energy, and then the main idea is talking about the great number of mitochondria. So that's why we need to think about the particular tissue type. What is the energy amount, energy demand? Okay, if the cells that particular tissue type, it requires a larger energy demand, so that means they need to have more mitochondria, right? Okay, so that's why for this question, okay, the thinking logic, okay, we call the function of the mitochondria, and then we call different processes or different activities of that particular cells they carry out, and then to determine how much energy do they need. So we go through the tissues one by one. So for the wall of the air sac, okay, that means this purple one, okay, this single cell, this purple one, okay. So for this one, actually the wall of the air sac just allow the gas to diffuse will be fine, okay. Oxygen diffuse, carbon dioxide diffuse, okay. So does diffusion require energy? You tell me. And then for the second one, the wall of the capillaries, the capillary wall is very thin, okay, and then it also allows material exchange. Maybe the oxygen diffuse out of the capillary to the cells, or the carbon dioxide diffuse into the capillaries, go back to the blood, or maybe some nutrients or waste, okay, they will diffuse across, okay, the capillary wall, or even the water, they will just move across by osmosis. And do diffusion and osmosis require energy? You tell me. And then for C, inner wall of the lymph vessel, that means this yellow one, okay, lymph capillary, and then they will join to form the lymph vessels, okay. So for this one, okay, we are talking about the removal of the tissue fluid, okay. They may diffuse, or maybe the water, okay, they will move back to the lymph capillaries, lymph vessel, okay, by osmosis. So the same question, do diffusion and osmosis required energy? We call the concept from chapter 3, okay. And then for option D, the inner wall of the small intestine, that's the concept of chapter 6. So in the small intestine we have the villi, and then if we take a look, okay, for the villi or the villus, okay, we can see these epithelium cells, okay, these cells, okay. So these cells can help the small intestine for the absorption, okay. So for absorption, then maybe diffusion, osmosis, and even active transport, because we want to absorb the food completely. All the glucose, I need to absorb it completely. The amino acids, okay, I need to absorb it completely, okay. So that's why we need active transport. So diffusion, osmosis, or active transport, which way, okay, which cellular transport, okay, we need energy. So if you can tell me that, or which process they need or they do not need energy, and then you can tell me which type of cells they should contain a lot of mitochondria. And then for question 2 and 3, okay, I talk about the diagram first, okay, because I would like to talk about some skills, okay, for you before we go deeper to the questions. So in chapter 8, okay, we have a lot of photo micrograph to study, okay. Maybe some question they may show you the drawing, okay, but most of them they will show you the real picture, the photo micrograph. And according to photo micrograph, we may not know the blood flow direction directly, okay, but it doesn't mean that we do not know. We can deduce, okay, that means we can know the direction indirectly, okay. So that's why we need to recall the adaptive features of the blood vessels to deduce the blood flow direction. For example, if we know that for this blood vessel X, okay, or I name it for blood vessel Y, okay, X and Y. So firstly, we can compare the thickness of the vessel wall, and then we can determine, okay, which type of blood vessels are they, okay. So for the vessel X, relatively thicker blood vessel wall, so it may be artery, and it will carry the blood away from the heart. And for the vessel Y, okay, thinner blood vessel wall, and then it may be a vein, and then the vein will carry the blood towards the heart. So that's why I told you that we can deduce the blood flow direction, okay, by recalling the adaptive features, the size of the lumen, and then also the presence or absence of the valves, okay, in the blood vessels, okay. And then for question 2, you see the question is very good for you, okay. Blood vessel X is an artery. It tells you so great, okay. So that's why we can eliminate a lot of the answer, and then we know that which part, okay, we can look for in our textbook, okay, to look for the answer. So the first 2 answers I would like to eliminate will be option C and D, because, okay, according to the textbook, we know that the lumen of the arteries is relatively smaller than that of the veins, okay. So remember the word relatively, okay, because for the capillaries, okay, the lumen of the capillaries is the smallest, and for the arteries is smaller than that of the vein, okay, and then the lumen of the vein will be the largest, okay. So remember, we are doing comparison, okay, so we need the word smaller, greater, larger, okay, or the word relatively, okay. So C and D are wrong. And then some misconception I would like to talk about first, okay, and also some study concept I would like to talk about. So for the first one, okay, the wall of the arteries, they contain a thick layer of muscle wall, muscular wall, and the muscle contracts or relax to change the size of lumen so that the amount of blood flow to different parts of the body can be regulated. So this concept is talking about the blood reallocation, okay. So it's talking about why we talking about is that means again, right? RE, again, okay. Reallocation, because for our heart is the first way, okay, to allocate the blood. The heart pump out the blood and then pump out the blood into different branches of the blood vessels, go to the brain, go to the arms, go to the toes, go to the liver, okay, and anywhere, okay. So that's the basic concept of the allocation. But why we are talking about the reallocation? For example, when we are performing rigorous exercise, okay, we are running, okay, we are jumping, okay, we are playing basketball. So the concept is that we need to supply more blood to our muscles, right? Because the muscles, okay, they need more oxygen, nutrients for releasing energy for muscle contraction, right? Okay, so that's why in this at this moment, okay, the muscle layer, it can help a lot, because for the arterioles, the muscular wall, they can contract or relax, just like here, okay, the thick layer of muscle, they can contract and relax to change the size of the lumen. So that's why the muscular wall of the artery, they contract or relax to constrict or to dilate the arterial lumen, okay. Constrict, it means become narrower, and dilate, it means it will become wider, okay. So the basic concept is that when we are performing rigorous exercise, okay, so the arterial joining to the muscles, okay, so the muscle wall will relax and dilate the arterial, okay, make the lumen become larger, right? And then we can supply more blood to our muscles, right? And on the other hand, when we are performing rigorous exercise, okay, we shall reduce the blood flow, okay, the amount of the blood to maybe small intestine, maybe to the stomach, because we are performing rigorous exercise. Okay, so for the digestion, okay, perhaps we can make it to the second priority, but not the first one. Okay, for example, we are not even doing exercise. We are escaping from the tiger, from the lion. They are just chasing after you. Okay, we need to survive. Okay, so we just reduce the blood supply to the small intestine. So at that particular moment, the arterial, okay, joining the small intestine, joining the digestive system, okay, the muscular wall will contract. The muscle will contract and constrict the arterial lumen, and then reduce the amount of the blood flow to that particular organ, right? Okay, so that's the concept of blood reallocation. And then for the other one, is that option B is also a very common misconception, because some of the students, they may think that, oh, muscular wall, Mr. Leung, and then the muscle wall, that means if they contract, they can pump the blood lah, just like the heart. Absolutely wrong. Heart is the organ to pump the blood, to generate a high blood pressure, but not the artery, okay, not the vein. Okay, so you can see that from this concept, okay, the wall of the artery contain more elastic tissues than the vein, okay, because the elastic tissue allow the arteries to distend and then recoil. Distend, it means when our heart pump the blood, okay, the high blood pressure will make the arterial a bit larger, the lumen a bit larger, okay, and then when the heart relax, the artery will recoil, because just like you are thinking about the rubber band, okay, we stretch it, okay, it can become longer, but if we relax, okay, so the rubber band will recoil, okay, back to the original shape. Okay, so that's why when the heart contract, the blood is forced out from the heart, and the arteries will distend. Okay, and then the heart relax, the arteries will recoil, causing the blood to flow forward. So that's why no matter your heart is contracting or relaxing, the blood flow in the artery, they will also move forward, make a continuous blood flow. Okay, so that's why it's not a way to generate the high blood pressure in our arteries. So that's why the final answer will be option A. Okay, the arteries have a thicker wall, and then it can allow the arteries to withstand the high blood pressure, okay, and then not easily to be broken by the high blood pressure generated by the heart, right? Question 2. And then question 3 is the easiest. Question 3 is talking about if the blood vessel X is connected with the lungs, it carries what type of blood. So according to question 2, we know that blood vessel X is the artery carrying blood away from the heart, and then for question 3, blood vessel X is the artery connected with the lungs. So that's why overall the blood vessel X will carry the blood from the heart towards the lungs. So that means it will be this blood vessel, and this blood vessel is pulmonary artery from the heart to the lungs. Okay, so that's why A and C will be wrong, because blood vessel X is the artery. Okay, so it will be away, it will be carrying the blood away from the heart, but not towards the heart. So A and C are wrong. And then you need to recall the functions of the lungs, okay, for gases exchange. So that's why you can determine which type of blood, okay, is the blood vessel X carrying. So I leave B and D for you. You choose the answer for me, okay? And then for question 6, just like the video we talk about the MC question in the textbook, okay, remember to do the good practice to label the blood vessel first, okay? Blood vessel 1, 2, 3, 4, pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, hepatic artery, and hepatic portal vein. So you need to label it first, okay, to make sure that you really know all the blood vessels, okay, before you really go to the question, okay. And the question is talking about which of the following correctly compares the oxygen content of the blood in the blood vessels when a person is performing rigorous exercise, okay. So in this part, I just want to highlight vessel 4. Vessel 4, that's the hepatic portal vein from the small intestine to the liver, okay. And just what I mentioned before for the blood reallocation, okay, when we are performing rigorous exercise, less blood will be pumped to the small intestine. Okay, so that's why the cells in the small intestine will receive less blood, but they will still consume the oxygen. So that's why actually the oxygen supply is lower than normal, right? Because the less blood supply. And at the same time, the small intestine will still perform respiration to consume oxygen. So that's why the oxygen content should be the lowest. Okay, so that's why you can see D is wrong. Okay, and then for even option C is also wrong. Okay, but what about A? A is talking about vessel 1. It contains the highest oxygen content and is absolutely nonsense. Okay, pulmonary artery carrying the blood from the heart to the lungs. Okay, and it should carry a deoxygenated blood. Okay, so how can it carry more oxygen? Okay, so because for the pulmonary vein, okay, it should carry the highest O2 amounts, not even blood vessel 3. Blood vessel 3, it receives the blood from the heart and then carry it to the liver. Okay, but somehow you know that the blood, okay, in vessel 3, it comes from the branches of the aorta. Okay, so that's why the oxygen level is not really that high, okay, as the pulmonary vein. Okay, so that's why the final answer should be B. Okay, and after we go to next question, okay, I would like to talk about this and other skills. Okay, so for the comparison, okay, this time we are doing MC, but maybe we are going to do the same question type in the short question or long question. So when you do this question, okay, you need to read the question carefully. Does it ask you to order, okay, the blood vessel or any other thing in descending order or ascending order? Okay, descending order, that means from the bigger one to the smallest one. Okay, ascending order, it means from the smallest one to the bigger one. Okay, and then for question 8 and 9 is talking about the tissue fluid. Okay, the passage of the fluid between the capillary and the intercellular space of a tissue. So intercellular, what is inter? Inter, that means amount, right? Okay, international, interclass, something like this. Inter-school, that means between the schools, okay, between the nations. Okay, so intercellular, between the cells, okay, the space. And then capillary, and then one is arterial end, venule end, okay, direction of blood flow, and then direction of the tissue fluid, formation of tissue fluid and removal of the tissue fluid. So that's why you need to find this page on your textbook to recall the concept of formation and removal of the tissue fluid first. And then for question 8, okay, before I talk about the correct answer, I would like to talk about the wrong answer first. Okay, option A, B, C. So this question is talking about the main reason for the fluid to leave the capillary at the arterial end. Okay, so that means this part, okay, from the arterial end, okay, to the capillaries, okay, and then to form the tissue fluid. Option A is wrong. Option A is talking about the tissue fluid is pumped out by active transport. It's not, because actually no energy is required for tissue fluid formation. It's just simply a physical movement. Okay, so due to the pressure difference, okay, once the arterial, okay, the blood go into the capillary, okay, the pressure of the blood is higher. It will become higher and then force out the some of the plasma to form the tissue fluid. Okay, so that's not the active transport. And then for the second one, the thin capillary wall at the arterial end allows the fluid to leak out. Okay, so option B is also wrong. Although the capillary wall is really thin, but it's still wrong. Okay, although capillary wall is thin, this statement is true, but it doesn't mean that the fluid they can leak out due to this thin layer. The fluid they can leak out due to its differential permeability. The capillary wall is differentially permeable. Okay, so that's why something small they can go out, but something big they will stay in the capillary. For example, the red blood cells. The red blood cells, they are just too big to so-called to go out, okay, or to be forced out of the capillary wall. But the small thing, the water, the minerals, the sugars, they are small enough to go out, okay. And then option C is also wrong. For the option C, the contraction of the skeletal muscle around the capillary squeeze out the fluid. And the concept should be the skeletal muscle lying next to the vein is squeezing the vein to make the blood, okay, to keep flowing forward, okay. So that's why it's not talking about the capillaries, okay, it's talking about the vein instead. So that's why that's A, B, C are wrong. And then we take a look at option D. Option D is talking about the pressure difference between the blood and the fluid in the intercellular space forced out of the fluid. You can refer to the paragraph first, okay? At the arterial end of the capillary bed, the pressure of the blood in the capillary is higher than the pressure of the fluid surrounding the blood body cells. So that's why in the arterial end, this one, okay, the blood pressure, okay, in the capillary is higher than the pressure, okay, outside the capillary. High pressure inside, lower pressure outside. So that's why high to low, okay, some of the plasma will be forced out of the capillary wall, okay. So that's why I want you to recall that, to think about why the blood pressure rises, okay, when the blood comes from the arterial to the capillary, okay. This the I would like to talk about this part in details, okay. So the first part, we need to compare the lumen size of the arterial and the lumen capillary first. And then once we know that the lumen size, and then we can know that why the pressure will become higher, okay. So the difference will be that the lumen of the capillary is relatively smaller than the arterial. It's just a simple concept. We learn it in the structure difference, okay, between the arteries and the capillaries. The lumen of the capillaries is just slightly bigger than a rubber cell, okay. So it's very small, okay, smaller than the artery and the vein, okay. So when we talk about the lumen size, okay, I will show you one metaphor. So imagine that you are holding a water pipe to watering the plant, okay. So that's the normal one, okay. You can see that the lumen size, okay, is normal, okay, and then you can see the water flow here. So imagine that, what about if you squeeze the water pipe, okay, you squeeze this part, you squeeze the opening of the water pipe. So what will be the water flow, okay, you squeeze it and then it will become like this, okay. You make the lumen of the water pipe smaller, and then the water pressure will become higher, okay. So that's the concept of the blood flow. They flow from a bigger lumen arterial to a smaller lumen capillaries, okay, and it will be like this. So relatively large lumen in the arterial, and for the capillary is relatively small lumen. So that's why from the big road to the small road, okay, so the blood pressure will become higher, and then it can refer to this concept, okay. And then I hope that it can help you to understand the whole paragraph, okay. Then we talk about question 9. Question 9 is talking about the removal of the tissue fluid. So some fluid will return to the blood capillary at the venule end, okay, because of what, okay. So venule end is here, so the tissue fluid will go back to the capillary, okay. So before I talk about A, B, C, D, okay, I talk about this paragraph first, okay. Once you read it, okay, and then I talk about why A, B, D, they are wrong. So as the plasma protein remain in the blood, why the plasma protein remain in the blood? Because they are just so big to go out. So the water potential of the blood at the venule end of the capillaries is lower than that of the tissue fluid. So that's why we are comparing the water potential. The water potential of the tissue fluid is higher than that of the capillaries, the blood in the capillaries. So that's why high to low. Okay, you always like to say that high to low, Mr. Leung. Okay, so from higher water potential, okay, the water will come. We will go back to the capillary from the tissue fluid to the blood by osmosis. Okay. So water in the tissue fluid is drawn into the capillaries by osmosis. So that's why the answer must be C. The water potential of the fluid in the intercellular space is higher than that of the blood. But why A, B, D are wrong? Okay, one by one. A, the pressure inside the capillary is greater than that outside. So this statement, okay, actually is true, but it cannot explain the removal of the tissue fluid, okay, because if this is the fact, okay, the pressure inside the capillaries, okay, is greater than that of the tissue fluid. So actually it's just talking about the formation of the tissue fluid, right? Okay, so in the capillary, high pressure, but for the tissue fluid, lower pressure. Okay, so that's why the plasma will be forced out, right? Option B is talking about the volume of the fluid around the body cell is greater than that in the capillaries. Okay, so the concept should be in the capillary, only some of the plasma will be forced out to form the tissue fluid. So that's why there are still a large part, a large proportion of the blood, of the plasma will stay in the capillary. So that's why the volume of the tissue fluid should be smaller than that in the capillaries, okay, than the blood in the capillaries, right? Okay, so option B is wrong. And then option D is talking about the oxygen content. The oxygen in the fluid has been absorbed by the body cells and then it needs to be replenished. So actually the oxygen content does not affect the flow of the tissue fluid. It's talking about the water potential, but not the oxygen or the carbon dioxide content. So that's all of the MC question, okay, and then we can go to the part 2 for the long questions.